Firstly, I chatted to Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg MP. He's the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset, a former Leader of the House of Commons, and he talked to me about his Catholic faith. Did you come to your faith early in life, or is it something that just you fell into?
Well, I'm very much a cradle Catholic. I was baptised very early on, and my family went to church every Sunday. As a small child, I found this extraordinarily boring and didn't want to go, which I found has been true of some of my children as well.
Yeah.
And then I grew up with it, and it became an increasingly important part of my life.
And back in 2017, that interview that you gave to, I think it was Piers Morgan at the time, when he challenged you about your faith and what you believed in connection with traditional marriage and your opposition to abortion, really brought you to prominence nationally around your beliefs.
Yes, which was a surprise because I'd gone into the studio to talk about Brexit. I hadn't expected to be talking about faith at all. And I was asked questions. And in a way, I was very lucky because I hadn't had any chance to prepare or to think through what I would say if asked about faith, because I had been expecting to talk about Brexit. And so I gave a very straightforward, immediate answer on issues that are of fundamental importance. And I think the life issues, the beginning of natural life at the point of conception through to natural death, are really essential to how society operates.
But then when you did become a government minister, the challenge was, how could somebody be a government minister and hold those views?
Except, fortunately, it's a free vote on all these issues. The government doesn't have a line on abortion or on euthanasia, and quite rightly so, that ministers and members of parliament must be free to follow their consciences in these areas.
And you have said that you didn't go in intentionally, and indeed you've confirmed it today, to talk about your faith, and you became a politician not to go around talking about religion, but it's something that you've become identified with, hasn't it, Jacob, in terms of your faith and your Catholicism?
Well, I'm very happy that in modern political discourse, there's a great belief in privacy. And privacy laws have grown up, and people say, well, that's one part of my life and I won't talk about that, and that's another part which I will talk about when it's convenient. I've never really believed in that. I think if you're a public figure, the people who vote for you have a right to know about you within reason.
Yes.
And who you are, what you are, how many children you've got, what your faith is. And therefore I don't feel any difficulty in discussing faith, and it will be part of how people judge me, inevitably, that my constituents will either be comfortable or uncomfortable with this.
And when you say judge you, I mean, sometimes people, I find, judge people of faith from whatever faith they are by looking at the extremes of that particular faith instead of what does this person actually believe. Do you think that's the case?
Inevitably. I mean, I think that's very hard on some members of the Muslim community who find that they get judged as if they hold very extreme views when the overwhelming majority don't. I suppose as a Catholic it's easy because I can just point to Rome and say, this is the teaching of the Catholic Church. It's set out. Here is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It is set out. This is what the Pope has had to say on this issue of faith and morals. And so Catholicism is whether or not you think the Pope is extreme, which some people may do and some people won't do, but it's much less my personal view in that sense.
And I suppose that's the faith, isn't it? It's more of a collectivism than perhaps Protestantism would be.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
That although the Catholic Church very much preaches about free will and the ability of the individual to exercise that free will, the tenets, the magisterium of the Church are set out very clearly.
And I just wanted to move on then to how you see the relationship between your faith and politics and how it has evolved over your period of time in Parliament. You've been in Parliament since 2010. Have you seen a change since you went into Parliament, for the good or for the bad?
I think there are many more people in Parliament of faith of different kinds than I had expected when I first got elected, which interesting and, in my view, both reassuring that there are people who have strongly held religious beliefs. They don't often get asked about them. I don't think they're hiding them away so much as the issue hasn't been raised, but I've been encouraged by how many people of faith there are. But faith rarely interferes with politics on a day-to-day basis.
I used to work with an evangelical Christian who, when people said to him, you need to take your faith out of politics and keep the two separate, his answer to that was, well, you simply can't, because it's who I am and it informs my every decision. Would you agree with that?
I think it's more nuanced than that. That I am who I am, and my faith is a very important part of that. But I see two different sides of life, really, that there is truth with a capital T. And what do I mean by that? I mean that Christ died to save us, and that he rose on the third day, and that the resurrection is a fact. And as St. Paul says, without the resurrection, all we're doing is in vain. And that everything about faith flows from that, and therefore I'm very happy to accept, once you've accepted the miracle of the resurrection, then it's easy to accept the other miracles that have taken place, and it's easy to accept the teaching of the Church. There's then politics. And politics is a matter of contention. And there isn't truth with a capital T. There is my opinion, there's your opinion. Well, our opinions often coincide, but
yes,
there are
exactly.
varieties of opinion.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I'm absolutely right on any political aspect in the same way as I can say, well, there is this great truth. And so when you're thinking about, should petrol engines be banned in 2030, I don't think I've got a hotline to God. No. So I don't think that is influenced by faith, although you're quite right, who I am as a person is inevitably influenced by faith.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you was, we've talked about how faith has worked through the Parliament when you've been in it, but how do you see the future? I mean, we see people of faith in Parliament. There are some who have suffered because of their faith. Tim Farron, for example, had to step down as Liberal Democrat leader because he felt the two conflicted. We watched how Kate Forbes was treated in Scotland in terms of her faith when she went forward for the position of First Minister of Scotland. Do you think that in the future people of faith will be put off being involved in politics, or do you think there's a space for politics and religion to coexist?
I think it's very important that there is a space. I think as a Conservative it is much easier than it is if you're in the Labour Party, the Lib Dems or the SNP. And obviously if you're with the DUP, it's part of your party. That's extraordinary how Sinn Féin has lost its faith.
Correct.
And has completely abandoned any understanding, as far as I can tell, of Catholic teaching, and certainly is strongly pro-abortion nowadays, which I think is very sad and damaging. But I admire Tim Farron and Kate Forbes in left-wing parties standing up for their faith and finding that that's very difficult. I think the left-wing parties have made a mistake in this. There's a great line of Harold Wilson about the Labour Party owing more to Methodism than Marxism.
Correct.
And that used to be one of the Labour Party's great strengths. And the Labour Party, particularly in Scotland, in Western Scotland, had a lot of support from the Catholic Church. And that link has dissipated because faith has been almost deliberately pushed out. And the Alistair Campbell quotation you used at the beginning is very important. In the Conservative Party, faith is still seen as a normal part of a Conservative politician's private life.
And of course, the Prime Minister now is a practising Hindu and makes no secret of that. Indeed, when he was in India earlier on this year, he was able to pray in public. And that's something presumably you welcome.
Oh, hugely. I think faith is very important. I think, particularly for politicians, an understanding that there is something very much more important than them is thoroughly beneficial.
Yeah. Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you so much for joining me.
Great pleasure. Thank you.